All right, so it's 9 o'clock here on Pacific Standard Time, 11 o'clock Central Standard Time. Let's get going with the webinar on global batch traceability. Looking a little bit more in detail. Last week we had a session done by Vainan Kamstra, one of my colleagues, to get things warmed up. Today we'll go a little bit deeper into the actual solution. First of all, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the little GoToMeeting question bar. We'll get to them at the end of the presentation and go from there. If you're also interested in hearing more about GBT, we do some tweets out on the GBT. If we find some articles or write some articles on our WordPress blog, we have a whole section dedicated to global batch traceability. That's the screen there on the right-hand side. On LinkedIn, as a company, we have a presence out there. That's QData. We also have a LinkedIn group, SAP Global Batch Traceability, which forms part of our supply chain extended solutions practice. Okay, so you'll see the group out there, and then also Facebook. We have a presence out there, so you're welcome to follow us on any one of those. If you're interested in looking at the session or sharing the session with others afterwards, it will be available on our website, qdatausa.com. Just click on resources and then previously recorded webinars. So there you'll find this webinar probably around about tomorrow. You'll also see Vainan's webinar from last week up on that site. So before we get started, if you're new to SAP, this is commonly what people have as an impression of implementing SAP. It's a big, complicated solution that just causes havoc out there, and with anybody that's associated with it. So I'm going to throw this out, and at the end of the presentation, we'll hopefully put a happier, friendlier spin on this. And GBT certainly is a happy, friendly implementation as opposed to some of the larger SAP implementations. Anyway, so let's get going. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to look at an overview of GBT, so cover some of the stuff that would have been covered last week. We're going to go through the components and the architecture, implementation considerations, extensibility, so how can we change this to fit our process as opposed to the standard one that's provided by GBT, and we'll just do a wrap-up. So hopefully we don't use the whole hour. If you have any questions, like I said, just type them in the bar, and we should have plenty of time at the end to run through it. Firstly, what is global batch traceability? First of all, it's a product released by SAP a little less than a year ago in December last year, so it's been around a while. So this is a good thing. And it's a tool that gives insight into batch genealogy. It's a repository of our batch information. It's pulled from our ECC business processes that are relating to batch managed products. Okay. SAP GBT 2.0 is imminent. It's probably looking for release in the January time frame. And it will be doing the handling units. So not only are we following batches, but we'll also be able to follow those batches within the handling unit hierarchy. So pallets and cases and the items and the batches that made those items, and follow that genealogy. It is also a tool that provides fast and efficient analysis for reporting on these batch or multiple batch distribution records. In other words, so these batches, where are they right now? Where were they distributed to? What are the actual addresses for those? And those are, some regulatory compliance requirements to understand that if a particular batch had an issue with it, and we need to recall anything that batch was used in making. So we need the distribution record from that batch and its subsequent batches up. Okay, so it's a perfect tool for that. GBT is an enterprise repository of batch-related objects and the relationships between them. So I mentioned that. Here's a diagram of a little bit of what we're talking about. The the little blue blocks, for example, are the batches that are in question with the attributes with that, and the little purple box are the actual documents that, if you want, goods movements that produced those batches or that consumed those batches, right? So there's basically a node and a relationship between those nodes, whether that's a purchase order and a production order, and the purchase order, procured and received a batch, and then that particular batch was then consumed in a production order. Those would be two nodes in the system, and the batch in between would be the relationship of that. So that's, in essence, how GBT builds up its genealogy, and you can almost get a sense now, if you're picturing it, if your batch managed process within an ECC environment is not all-encompassing, so every time you're dealing with a batch, capturing it in the system, doing the right goods movement to get against the correct documents, then we're going to start to lose the tree relationships. So if it's broken in any point in the space, we won't have the full genealogy of that batch. So it's very key to understand that we do need the whole batch management process to be fully there in the ECC in order to get the full genealogy, the full relationships displayed in the GBT system. Okay. With the fact that it has now, it is a repository of all of our batch information, we have the ability to write reports and on this repository of information and obviously publish that to the users out there. Well, SAP provide a couple of what they call one-click reports. So in other words, just click on it. Here's my bad batch distribution for precision holds. So this is a batch distribution record, and we would write this or click on this report and execute this report if we were trying to perform a hold of a particular product that we know to be bad, so we don't want it to carry on. If this product has already been released, then how do we pull this off the shelves? How do we do that recall? Well, let's go and, based on this particular bad batch, let's run this report, and that's my distribution record of everywhere where this is actually happening. And that's just it's just a report written on, based on the batch repository of information sitting in GBT. There's 3 more reports that are available: standard stock overviews, in order to internally restrict the bad batch. One other point to note is with GBT we can process and report on several batches in a single run. The ECC centric solution of some sort of GBT, but so ECC has some of this functionality, but you can only run one batch at a time. We can also do material balance reporting out of GBT. And we'll get back to some of those reports in a little bit now. Looking at batch management and global batch traceability side by side, I want you to be clear that GBT is not batch management, but the next slide will go through a little bit in detail. So on the ECC side, we have got some of the folks that basically say, but ECC can provide all this functionality in GBT. In some instances, yes, in some instances, no. So let's call out the differences here and go through that. So the column on the left are the little components, and we'll go through that. Then we've got ECC, then we've got GBT. All right. So from a top-down, bottom-up analysis, from a tree view perspective, yes, that's available in ECC and it's available in GBT. The same view, but from a graphical perspective, so sort of the diagram that we showed before, that's not available in ECC. So there's no way of easily navigating between the different nodes and the relationships between that, graphically and clicking. That's only available in GBT. Cross-system tracing capabilities. So ECC is only limited to the batch processes that you perform on that particular ECC instance and in that client. So if you have more than one instance, then GBT is the one that will be able to pull that information from the various ECC systems and create that enterprise repository for your batch information. That's not available in ECC. The consideration of non-SAP systems, so if you have some systems out there that are part of your batch managed process, ECC does not allow that information or does not query that information, so it's not part of your genealogy and you cannot report on it. From a GBT perspective, there's a couple of integration options available to you. We'll go through those in a little bit. But yes, you can pull that information into GBT and also display it as though it was coming out of ECC. ECC does not consider handling units or also serial numbers. GBT does. When I say does, I should rather say it will do. That is coming in GBT 2.0. Okay. In November, they're doing workshops to fine-tune some of that functionality, but with that being said, it should be released in an early release in January 2014. Considering non-SAP tracked objects palettes, so ECC does not do that, whereas in GBT it does. The analysis of multiple objects in one run, I mentioned that before. You can select multiple batches and show that in your tree form. Whereas in ECC, it's one by one, and it takes a lot of effort to actually, break it down and run these reports multiple and then combine them yourself. The ability to identify broken links to maintain your batch network. I spoke about that if you're, for example, doing a goods receipt and you do it without reference to the purchase order number. So now, in other words, you've just pulled in some stock against the PO, but you didn't mention the PO. We've broken the link in the chain, right? So obviously I'd like for you to actually go restore it in ECC and do it against the actual PO, but if you don't, you have the ability in GBT to actually go and fix that link and say, all right, I know this receipt actually was meant for this PO, so let's connect the two up and restore the broken tree. Okay, distribution records to inform the government office and customers. So there is a report that will suffice for your regulatory or your compliance regulations. Not available in ECC, but yes, it's coming out of GBT. In terms of performance, the GBT database is optimized for on the performance side and the querying of data based on that the batch genealogy. Okay, so quite a few things extra there coming out of the GBT. What GBT is not, it is not a batch management solution. So if you don't manage your batches through SAP or through your process right now, if it's all paper-based, then it's not going to help you there. You first need to get it in the system so that we can then pull it out of the system. And GBT is the repository of that information and then the reporting that sits on top of that repository to provide it. But it certainly does not manage your batch information for you as it flows through the supply chain. So we need, from a good batch management solution, we need you to capture the proper batch information as goods movements are executed. We'll see in a little bit that all of the information, the integration point is with the goods movement table. So if it's not running through the goods movement table and you're doing it out in spreadsheets or you don't have the batch information stored in the system, then we can't help you with that. Okay, garbage in, garbage out. I guess this is the point of that slide. All right, so just to recap from an overview perspective, for those of folks who don't know what GBT, didn't know what it was before, it's a repository of your batch information, as it is extracted from ECC. It's stored in this repository, and then they provide you with reporting capabilities on top of that so that you can give your distribution record to the regulatory authorities. You can perform a recall, a targeted recall once you've done the analysis as to, well, what is the bad batch, and you can see, the extent of your issue. So if I go through the components that make up GBT, there's several of them over here. First of all, at the bottom side of things is our integration with our ERP ECC system. So however many you have, we'll be tying in and pulling the information out there and putting it in our batch genealogy repository. All right. If you have third-party batch management type solutions, or they're also part of your process, then we pull those through web services into the batch repository, and we store it over there. On top of the GBT, on top of that repository are the GBT reports. So we can search batches, we can do our one-click reports, we have our graphical genealogy tool that is written, I think, Microsoft Silverlight type tool that sits on top of that repository and gives you the graphical view. We can search many batches in one run. We mentioned that. We have a top-down, bottom-up, where used list. Those are reports on that. So all the top left-hand side, those are our reporting capabilities. And then the one admin type function is, let's identify and maintain those broken links in the system. So even if our systems at the bottom are there are misbehaving and they're not doing their work properly, if we're able to analyze and identify a particular broken link, then there it is. You're able to go and fix it. Now, it does provide some standard integration into some of the transactions in ECC that we know are famous for broken links. For example, receiving doing a goods receipt without reference to a purchase order. Those are highlighted for you. You can go through those, and if you can identify the PO that it needs to go against, then we can do that. Okay, so from a search functionality, here is the web UI interface that they provide for us. We can search based on the different attributes that we store in the system, and this is part of the implementation effort out there, is what attributes against the batch do we need to capture, and what do you search on? What do we display in the nodes on the graphical tree? In each one of those, we just need to decide whether those are searchable or not. So just they provide a nice little graphical web UI tool over here. This is ultimately the graphical view of that, which is actually a very cool tool. It allows you to focus in on any particular point in here. If you focus on it, from there you can say, all right, show me that bottom up, top down for that particular piece. So if I'm looking at this particular diagram over here, I'm highlighting a particular batch, and I'm looking downstream and upstream of that particular batch. But then if I move up maybe 2 levels, and I see that maybe this is the particular batch where I found my particular problem, I would then highlight that particular batch and look at my top-down, bottom-up view of that one. So then it would isolate everything that came in as an input from a batch perspective into this particular one that made this batch, and then from this particular batch, where was it consumed in outbound deliveries, production orders, wherever it went. From there, it shows me the distribution record. Okay, so it's a pretty good tool, quick and easy to navigate and actually see the extent of the issue that we're dealing with. So here's the top-down list. It's an ALV grid report. We type in our batch, and we get everything that was consumed, all the batches that made up this particular batch that we're dealing with. From a bottom-up perspective, we select a batch and we say, all right, show me all the places where this particular batch ended up being used. All right. The one-click report, this is a report on the repository data. Like I said, SAP provide 4 reports in this particular space out of the box. The rest, if you need any more, you can take that report, you can have a look to see how it is that they're accessing the data, and you do it in the same way, and you can provide your own look and feel of reports. Okay. This one over here is showing us the physical addresses of the goods receipts for the selected batches. Okay. Here we're talking about the fixed linkage. Okay, batch relevant materials that were received without being assigned to a purchase order. I mentioned that. So standard out of the box, it's saying these ones over here were received without any purchase orders. I can flag it as not relevant, which means it disappears. So this is not one I'm interested in. The other ones over there, if we decide that it is, we would then click on it and assign it to a particular batch. Okay. Mentioned here we can select multiple batches and report on them in a single run. We have the ability to pull data into GBT from multiple systems. That's fine, and we'll go through that in a more of a graphical way in a little bit. So let's look at how does it work. Okay. First of all, material movements are made and stored in the CHVW table. All right, that's SAP standard tables, and there's a few other CHV type tables, but for process orders and so forth. But CHVW table is there. Once we've installed the add-on for ECC, that information is automatically sent to a GBT transfer table, and it sits there waiting for GBT to query it. On the GBT side, number 4 over there, we schedule an RFC call which pulls the information out of the GBT transfer table with all of our goods movement that relate to our batch management, batch managed materials, and then also a couple of transactions that don't run through that table. We go and pull that information through it. Now that's standard functionality on the GBT side. 5, 6, and 7 deals with how do we get our master data into GBT, right? So obviously we're interested in materials. We're interested in the vendor and customer relationships, because each one of them we're going to procure some stuff from suppliers, and we're going to sell folks to customers. So we need that information so that we can get the addresses of the folks that are receiving the products and so forth. Obviously, the batch master information we need to get over, and then the classification information. Excuse me. And then the plant information. So whereabout is the stuff being manufactured, where are we receiving the products, and so forth. So those are our 6 pieces of master data that are coming across. 5 of them are coming across using the IDOC ALE technology. So as you change the information in ECC, a change pointer would be created. This is number 6. You schedule a job, RBD MIDOC, to go and pull those from those change pointers, generates an IDOC. That IDOC is a special GBT type IDOC, and it sends it across into GBT, and GBT will then go and update the master data records accordingly. The one that differs is the plant information. That doesn't come across using ALE, even though there is an ALE scenario, but they've chosen to implement it just using an RFC report. So you would schedule something in GBT to pull that information from the plant. Obviously, you don't change the plant too often, so you don't need to schedule it too much, only if there's new plant information happening. So once the information is, those are GBT objects that are sitting in there. This is now you're ready at the end of the day when your number 4 runs and it's pulling that information. Now your reporting can actually start to look at the information in that GBT batch repository. And we sit there, and that's the monitoring aspects of it, sitting on top of that, basically the database. So I mentioned that there were a few other CHVW type tables. It integrates with all of those, right? So CHVW for your normal goods movements, CHVW_Inc. For multiple batch valuation of production process and repetitive manufacturing orders. The Inc_per is for the valuation of purchase orders and subcontracting orders. So we're dealing with any goods movement, across any one of these transaction types. Is going to be captured and then sent over to GBT. Okay. So understanding those are the pieces of the puzzle. How do we go about putting that in, and how should we go about putting that in? All right. So there are a couple of deployment options that are available to you if you have multiple instances of ECC. You have the option of installing GBT as its own component, a standalone component. So you'd install NetWeaver 7.31 and install the GBT component on top of that. And then you would link your ECC systems using ALE and then the RFC technique to pull the information in. But you first need to install the integration component for GBT on each of those ECC instances that you want to send GBT data to, or send data to GBT. All right, so that's that GBT int 100 component, the integration component. It gives you the extended IDOCs and gives you the integration to the CHVW table. A second deployment option is it can run on your ECC environment natively as an add-on component. So if you were to do that, you would install both the integration component, which gives me my ECC integration, as well as the GBT component, which gives me my GBT functionality, so the reporting capability and that the web interface and so forth. The limitation obviously over here is your ECC environment needs to be running on 7.3.1, so quite a high release of NetWeaver compliant software. Also going forward, you would then be subject to the different releases. If you want to upgrade ECC, you need to make sure that GBT can be upgraded too, and if you want to upgrade GBT, you need to make sure that ECC gets upgraded. So that's one of the main reasons why SAP always points towards a standalone implementation so that you can be upgrade independent for. So this is an option over here. And if you do have other ECC systems, obviously you're only going to use one ECC system for your enterprise-wide batch repository. So enterprise being the key word, one for your enterprise. I mentioned earlier about integrations with the third-party system. Here's the way of doing that. So if in your non-SAP system, you've got your master data and you've got your transaction data. First of all, from a master data perspective, we would need to get a file from you. That file would be then uploaded into the system. We need to configure the mapping side of things, and then that gets loaded into the database. From a transaction perspective, we can either send it if they're able to give us a web, or call a web service in the format that we want to. They can call that web service directly. That would just go into an inbound queue and then goes through the mapping exercise and ultimately into our GBT database. So that's sort of a small effort on the GBT side, but a larger effort on the non-SAP side. But if they can give us a format that we can't read in GBT, then it needs to go through a translation tool, so either through MRI or a NetWeaver PI, where we would then translate that and then call the web service in the GBT web service as defined. So then that translation needs to happen outside of the system. So master data, we do a file upload. Transaction data, they either call the web service or they send us a format in whatever format that PI can handle, which is most things. And then PI will unscramble that, translate that into a web service call, and then that will be posted into GBT. Okay. Another option, obviously this one would probably be the preferred option, but maybe not always used out there, is if the information is coming through a non-SAP system, it would be great if we were able to actually just integrate that into the goods movement of ECC. So if someone's telling us about a goods receipt that they've done in a third-party system, we'll come and actually perform the goods receipt in ECC with the right batch information over there. And then, as you can see, that's just the normal integration mechanism with GBT. There's nothing extensive over there. So the only difference would be getting from the connection layer, on the third-party system. The interface would then be into a goods movement transaction. Okay, and there's some standard IDOCs to perform that, and BAPIs. So that third-party system can potentially do that. All right, from a sizing consideration, we have the recommendation from SAP, a dual-core CPU processor with 8 gigabytes of RAM. You can see this is tiny. This is not a big ECC system. This is not CRM. This is a tiny system, dual-core CPU processor with 8 gigabytes of RAM. this is most iPhones are bigger than that. Disk space, assuming 10-year retention period, 4 new objects per year. This is where it starts to get a little bit bigger. Small is about 200 gigabytes, medium 1 terabytes, large 9 terabytes. So now we're talking about some large chunks of data. It really depends on how many transactions you're dealing with that are batch management. Okay, so that's just those are the recommendations as given out by SAP. From an installation perspective, there are 2 components to it, one on the ECC side and obviously then on the GBT side. On the ECC, you need to install the add-on for the GBT integration, and then you need to do the ALE configuration. So if you don't know what ALE is, Application Link Enabling, it's the integration between 2 SAP systems. It allows you to integrate both your master data and your transaction data. In this instance, they're only using the master data piece for batches, classifications, material master, customer master, vendor master, and the address. And then the plant is coming through an RFC call. Okay, so there's some RFC destinations set up in that environment too. On the GBT side, obviously you need to install NetWeaver. We need to install the GBT software. NetWeaver Business Client is the UI piece, so you need to install that. Then you need to do the inbound ALE configuration, so logical systems, RFC destination, and inbound IDOC processing. That's fine. On the mapping side, classification and characteristics typically are different at the different clients. So you wouldn't have the standard classifications and characteristics that SAP provided when you got the software, so we need to do mapping between what you guys use and what GBT currently has. GBT configuration at the end of the day, categories and hierarchies, and then baddie activations, and we'll go through some of the baddies now. That's what's behind there. Okay, so currently with this version of GBT, you would enable your batch capturing and sending to GBT at a plant level. All right, so if your batch managed material goes through 3 different plants, then you need to activate it for those 3 different plants. And as long as it's a batch enabled material, then it will actually go through that functionality. But if it goes through a 4th one and that one is not enabled, then you basically have broken the link in the chain. That particular one is not captured. All right. So you will have an issue if your material goes through a process that is not enabled for batch GBT enabling. So basically, the main point at the top there, activate the plant if you think that your materials are going to go through, and only deactivate it. So don't send the data to GBT if you're very sure that it won't be relevant for GBT ever. Okay, so when you archive transactions in ECC, this will cause broken links in GBT. So this is definitely a consideration that you need to make. Okay, GBT considers goods movements at a plant storage location level. FYI, you cannot change ship to addresses in GBT. All right, it's purely a reporting mechanism, and it's part of that regulatory compliance piece. The transaction data is where you need to change things. Master data, you change them. If it's permanent change to a ship to address, then when you do a receipt or a goods issue, then it should read that master data. But then once that data is set that this is the particular place that this delivery is going to, there's no way of changing that in GBT. So it's not a limitation, it's a statement. All right, so from an extensibility perspective, we can load the detail. This first baddie over here, the IL load detail, allows us to retrieve additional information for our objects. So if we're doing a goods issue on a delivery, we can tell in the GBT system that this particular carrier, even potentially the carrier, the tracking number, the SCAC code, any other information that may help us in the investigation if we were to do a particular recall, For example, if there was a recall, but we see that it actually we don't have a proof of delivery yet for this document, we could potentially get hold of the tracking or the carrier, and based on the tracking number, get them to not deliver that product and so forth. This is the value that we would need to actually pull the extra information in from. Also, the second one over here, the event enhance, is the one that we use if we want to limit the data that goes to GBT, past what is currently available in configuration, which is at the plant level. So for basically we may take it down to a material type level. So for this particular plant, if the material type is A, it goes to GBT, but if it's B, then no, it's not relevant for GBT. Okay, so LOBM underscore is the standard characteristics. That's going to our ERP system. In GBT, we've copied that over to SAP underscore GBT, and that's going into GBT. What we need is to do the mapping from your version of the characteristics, because no one is using those standard ones. So whatever you've copied your one into ECC, we need to do the mapping from your characteristics into what we see in GBT. Okay. In terms of implementation effort, that's probably the main one over there, is just to get to understand your characteristics and what you've implemented and what it is that you want to see in the nodes of the report. What are the attributes that you need to be able to report on and select on and search on. Okay. All right, let's wrap up here. We've still got a few minutes, so 20-odd minutes. Yes, if you have any questions, you can start to put them down. I'm going to run through a quick couple of slides over here and just say, typically from a QData perspective, how do we help you guys help yourself in this particular space, being GBT. The first one over here is I have what we call our GBT maturity chart, and this is a chart that we run through you guys during maybe a scoping assessment up front early, before even engaging with you guys as a potential implementation. We go on site, we have a look at the data that you guys are looking at, we have a look at the processes that you're following, and then we determine in which quadrant, which maturity quadrant you are sitting in. If your data is poor, so if you're doing manual interventions to get your data correct, if the data is inaccurate in your system, if we're performing activities outside of SAP, on spreadsheets and Access. We were talking to someone this morning where part of their process is being done by Access database, and then they print things out and they don't store the information in the system. Definitely they're in quadrant 1. All right, so we need to do a housekeeping exercise in order to get you out of that quadrant, to make sure that the data is good in the system. The second one is, are our business rules in the system? Are you executing the stuff in the system, right? So let's bring them into the system. Let's define service levels in the system. Let's work all of our batch processes in the system, and let's use standard processes and give you standard visibility into the system in that space. So if your data is good, but you're not using the system properly, and your rules aren't in the system, in other words, you're not letting the system generate your purchase orders for you, you're doing your own thing and so forth. Let's get that one squared away. Let's get the plan, let's get the rules, let's get you using the system properly. Once that's in place, and now we're using ECC, our data is good and everything like that, then we can start to move into quadrant 3 as an organization. This is when we start to get our maturity as an organization. Because once our data is good, once our process is good, then we can start to implement the additional functionality that gives us business value at the end of the day. So part of that functionality is a solution like Global Batch Traceability. So something that you plug on top gives us a fast reaction to help us, assist us in recalls. It's implementing an enterprise-wide batch repository in the system, but it's just pulling from our standard solution. So you need to be in a quadrant 3 before you can successfully implement a global batch traceability type solution. We need a good system in place. So this is partly what we're talking about over here. All right, some key points to take home. A GBT is not a batch management system. GBT is a repository of batch objects and the relationships between them. GBT focuses on reporting on and browsing the batch genealogy tree. Extensibility allows you to bring your own required attributes to GBT. So again, this is one of the key points of an implementation, which isn't too big in this particular space. Garbage in, garbage out. Okay. Okay. The main value over here is greatly reduces the time to insight. And you know, if I can understand what that means, insight is the knowledge of the extent of an issue that is out there. It is the knowledge of the scope of what we're looking at over here. So it's the aha moment to say, oh my goodness, this is where we are right now. It's like, okay, so it's only this, that's good. And with GBT and its ability to do that multiple batch searching, the top-down, bottom-up approach at the same time, and isolating, you know, where your particular issue is, and then graphically having a look at that gives you that aha moment. You can get to that moment much quicker with the GBT process, whereas in an ECC standard tool, that could take you months to get to that aha moment. Right? If you're looking for more information, like I mentioned before, on our website we do have a batch GBT section. You can go over there. There's a white paper out on GBT that covers some of the stuff that we discussed today and maybe a little bit more detail if you need. Like I mentioned, there's a LinkedIn group out there that is part of our efforts to share information out with the larger community that are interested. And if you truly are interested based on this particular webinar, then the next steps would be what we call a readiness assessment, which is just a short discussion, you know, a couple of hours. We have that discussion just to run through any questions that you may have around GBT. Is this right for you? Is this something you want to investigate? No cost, just contact us and we can get that one done. If we then decide that GBT is something that you definitely want to look at, then we do an on-site scoping assessment where we come down, we have a look at your business processes, we put you in the maturity quadrant, so we make you fully aware of it as to what the scope is that you need, that needs to be executed in order to effectively implement the solution, right? And we give you a roadmap towards implementing this, and the purpose of that scoping assessment is to deliver that roadmap and give you the budgetary requirements, you know, in order to do the full project implementation. All right. So that's just it limits your risk. It's a small engagement. It's a paid engagement, but you put that engagement out there just so that you, from an organization perspective, can fully understand and be aware as to what you're getting into, and you can choose to do it or not do it after that assessment. All right, so here's our crazy stuff. I feel like doing this to SAP and anyone associated with that craziness on the left-hand side. If we follow our methodology in terms of implementing a solution with that readiness assessment and a scoping assessment, if we get the right driver who uses the right tools for the job, then it goes a lot smoother, all right, at the end of the day. And that, I guess, is the point of it out being there. We've heard a lot of SAP projects where the guys go crazy, but then there's also projects that were done really well and the folks are really happy. Both of them are using the same software. All right, at the end of the day, it's the choice of your driver. I want to thank you for your time and now answer any questions that you guys have.